my friends are simps.
My all-time favourite bit of gear for writing and performing music is the Dirtywave M8. I love how powerful yet portable it is, and as somebody that got into this whole electronic music thing via LSDJ on the Game Boy, I'm very comfortable with how it operates. However, I know that that is not the case for everybody. Now, I've already shared lots of different videos on the M8, including explainers, tutorials, and also just a whole pile of my own music. But people have been consistently asking me to do walkthroughs of some of my project files and explain how I put songs together in practice. So today I'm going to do just that. And if this is useful, then maybe I'll do the same thing with others. We'll see. The track that I'm going to be looking at is one that I uploaded to the channel fairly recently. And rather than play the full thing in its entirety again, I'll just share a link to that video so that you can peruse it at your own leisurely pace. The project file or bundle for this track is already available up on Patreon, of course, along with basically every other M8 track that I've ever written. So if you sign up there, you'll be able to download them and poke about on your own device, be it the M8 handheld or the headless version. The link, of course, for that is in the description. With all of that out of the way, let's take a look at the track itself. And to do so, I will have to rearrange my face. Whoop, and let you see the M8. Hey, it worked. I've got the M8 down here. I'm controlling it connected to my computer using the M8 remote display function on m8.run in Google Chrome. And that's how this is operating. I've got particularly clicky keys in there, so if you can hear clicking, then that's what it is. Now, the first thing that you might notice here is that at the top of the project file, I've split things up into different sections with these breaks in between. But if I scroll down, you'll find the entire song in a single block. So if I play, or if I press play down here, it will go through the entire arrangement from start to finish. Whereas, if I press play in any one of these, they will just loop the individual row. I've gone into this particular approach in some detail in my previous video on live mode, so if you're interested, then you can go watch that. But effectively, this allows me to have the final arrangement preserved, whilst also providing me with the ability to easily loop individual sections. So if I'm playing a gig, I will always manually trigger each row or group of rows, kind of like you would with Ableton or the Akai Force or other clip triggering philosophies. The final version of each track that I write and save in a bundle usually ends up looking like this, so that I've got both options in one. This particular track happens to have quite a lot of different loops broken out into individual rows, and that's because I've made liberal use of the effects lanes to vary the different parts as the track progresses. That means it can sound like there's quite a lot going on, but it's actually fairly simple composition-wise. I'm not using tables at all in this track, so it shouldn't be too difficult to understand or try out for yourself. I don't really like to overcomplicate things unnecessarily because I don't have the patience or perhaps the brain power for that, to be honest. Now, in terms of arrangement logic, moving from left to right, I tend to try and keep drum loops or one-shots to tracks 1 and 2, rhythmical one-shots that is, so like kick drum, snare drum, etc. Bass usually lives in track 3, melodic parts are in 4 to 6. Then tracks 7 and 8 will have effects or vocals or, that kind of thing. I'm not really especially strict about this, but I found that having a rough kind of system helps a lot when composing, but also especially when it comes to playing live. So you know which element is roughly in which area for, muting or changing the mixer values or whatever. As I've explained before, I use chains marked as FE as blank or spacer chains. So for example, FE in particular has got 4 blank phrases per chain, which means that everything stays nicely in time. And I also use other chains beginning with F as utility chains. So for example, FD has got 3 blank phrases, FC has got 2, FB has got 1, and so on. Similarly, I also use FA. This has got 4 blank phrases again, except the top one here is FD, and that's because it's got a kill command, which I use to help stop any trailing audio or samples which might be running on from the previous phrase. All of this is set up in a template, by the way, that I've created and load every time I start writing a new track, so I do have some consistency and I don't have to set that up every time. Now, for this particular song, I've used the drum loop as the foundation, and that lives in track 1. When I do this, start off with the drum loop, I first create a chain which just repeats the unmodified loop. So in chain 10, for example, I've got the sample triggering in phrase 00, which is listed in phrase 1 and 3 in this particular chain. 0 and 2 as they're numbered. And then I've got a blank phrase in between to let the entire loop run through. Once I've got this initial bog standard loop set up, I then create copies of the chain and add in variations, often by using different effects. So for example, chain 1B is very similar to chain 10, but I've got some things going on. For example, a combination of the slice and retrigger commands in the final phrase, which let me jump to a particular part of the loop and then get a repeating kick drum sound, which sounds like this. Now, if you look at chain 19, we can see an alternative way to spice up loops, where I've used the degrade effect, which is bit crush, to basically squash the drums and make them all distorted on a per step basis, even though the loop itself, as you can see, is fairly unmodified. So if I scroll down, you'll see different degrade commands here, and that sounds like this. Looking at chain F, or chain 1F, it must be. Yeah, looking at chain 1F, if we go to the last phrase here, phrase 67, I've used a combination of all of these techniques. So I trigger the basic loop at the start of the phrase, then I jump about different parts of it with the slice command, which you can see here. After that, I throw in a wee cheeky retrigger at the end, and in the second effects lane, I'm also changing the degree of bit crushing that is applied. And altogether, it sounds very grungy and glitchy and industrial, like this. The drums for this entire song are basically put together like this. It doesn't get much more complicated than that, though I do also use the kill command at times to create space. So for example, if we scroll down here to chain 26, you can see this at work. You'll note that there is also an occasional ARP command, which I've been using just to really glitch up the audio before killing it to add on some additional flavour. Whilst I'm on this topic, one interesting thing to note about the slice command is that there are different ways to utilise it. So for example, you can use the slice section within the instrument screen and have it automatically slice up your sample into different chunks. In this case it's off, but I'm still using the slice command, and that's because I've baked in the individual slices into the sample itself using the edit screen. You have to do this if you want to be able to play slices in the classic mode, where the sample will play through each slice. Otherwise, if you just use this slice section, you need to then individually set and trigger each slice within the effects lanes, because it will only play the slice that you've selected. That's my top tip for that. It took me a wee while to figure that out, and the wonderful people in the Dirtywave M8 Discord helped me figure out what was going on. So in track 2, I've got another percussive loop, which is just complementing the foundational drums. So here, I'm using a combination of all of the same effects that I deployed for the original loop in track 1, including slices, retriggers, ARPs, and kill commands. In addition though, I've also thrown in the additional pitch bend here and there to pull the sound down or pull it up at certain points. So for example, in chain 18, you can hear a good example of how this comes together. As you can probably tell, I'm also changing the note values throughout this pattern every so often to give it a bit more variety. And I think the beauty of trackers, or the beauty of using trackers, is that no matter how much you mangle a loop like this, you can very quickly get back in sync by retriggering a different slice in the next step, which is why it's so great for glitchy IDM style arrangements. And if you combine tracks 1 and 2 with all of these kind of techniques, you can get some really cool rhythmical interactions like this. Track 3 contains the bass parts of the song and is by far the simplest element. Here I've basically just played a smattering of notes on different FM presets throughout. Some of these I've written and some I have loaded from packs, including one I think from Rootnode, who is in the Dirtywave M8 Discord. There isn't really much to say about these. They basically just provide a bit of chunk and texture, and a lot of what makes them interesting comes from the FM synthesis as opposed to my composition. I don't actually really understand FM at all, so I can't help you there. I basically just play about until I find something that looks good, or sounds good, I guess I should say. So. Track 4 is one of the key parts of this entire song, and for this I used another preset, this time called something like Gentle Brass. I can't remember exactly where I got this, but I'm fairly sure it was just in one of the packs available either on the M8 stock or from the Discord. I didn't modify this in any meaningful way, apart from to apply some chorus, delay and reverb. The patterns themselves are very straightforward. I thought the synth sound with the effects on its own sounded great as is, so I didn't apply a huge number of variations via the effects lanes, except to add a pitch bend to certain parts. That is something that is one of my all-time favourite things to do with trackers, and you can hear that in action somewhere. Yes, here. If I take you down now to chain 7, here I have used the ARP command again, as well as the vibrato command to add a wee bit of wobble to certain steps in addition to the pitch bend, and that sounds like this. One thing I did do with this section of the track is to gradually shift one of the FM values to open it up and make it a bit more aggressive as a kind of build. So down here in this section, with chains 9, B and C, this was achieved by modifying one of the FM values in the effects lane. So I basically played about until I found a sound that I liked in the FM synth parameters and adjusted that core sound using the effects lanes, which sounds like this. Oh, a cheeky preview of that there. Now there were a couple of notes that I wanted to accentuate in this part of the track, so I used a reverb send effect to push individual hits through the reverb at certain points at a much higher rate, which sounded pretty cool. I think they're in 21 and 22. Yes, so SRV down here. Send reverb. Hear that? Not bad. Track 5 is a bit of a strange one. Here I clearly decided that the kick drum in the original loop wasn't thick enough, and so I reinforced it by adding a one-shot kick in track 5 to give it a bit of extra oomph. I could have resampled things down here to be more economical, so basically putting the kick drum into the original and making that a single wav, as it were. That would probably be the smarter thing to do, actually, but it's not something I'm really in the habit of doing, and ultimately it wasn't really necessary for this. I had enough space to do what I wanted, so yeah, I never bothered. As you can probably hear, I did also use track 5 to add in a wee bit of randomised glitchy effects in the treble region. For this, I just picked a preset from the built-in macro synth called Particle Noise, I think it might have been. Created some triggers and then set a pan value in effects lane 1 at the start of the chain. After that, I used these random triggers, which randomise the previous effect every time you invoke it. So over the course of the chain, for example, here, the glitchy particle noise bounces about your ears effectively. And with a lot of delay, I think it just adds a wee bit something extra to the top end. You'll obviously need to use headphones to hear that, but still. Track 6, I think, yes, has got the Magic Box preset from the built-in macro synth. This is slathered in delay and reverb yet again, as you can see, and this is used kind of at the crescendo of the entire track, so it doesn't really come in until nearer the end. It sounds like this. In many ways, it kind of adds a sweet chiptune quality to what is otherwise a fairly dark track. And for this, I used many of the same effects I've already spoken about, but largely the randomized panning, vibrato, and also strategic pitch bends to make it sound a bit less rigid. Can you hear that? The police, they're coming. Not bad. Now for track 7, talking a chiptune, this is the closest to a traditional Game Boy sound as I get to in this track. I took the built-in wave synth with what I believe was 50% pulse wave, and then drowned it in reverb, using it to reinforce other elements of the bass and melody. So it's not complicated at all, but it just kind of sits in the background, adding a wee bit. So if we look at chain 62, for example, you can hear it as almost a drone. Very straightforward. Chain 5F, which is the next section under phrase 73, it's got a wee bit of a pitch bend going on as well, so. And that might not sound like much on its own, much like all of the individual tracks, but when you put them together, it sounds really cool and all makes sense, which you'll hear in a minute. Track 8 is usually where I throw all of my weird miscellaneous bits and pieces, so random one-shot samples, vocals, or other so-called ear candy to make things a bit more interesting, you know, and try and avoid also getting caught in this trap of having multiple sections that just sound exactly the same. So for this song, I used track 8 in exactly that kind of way. So if we listen to chain 80 here, you can see that in the first and last phrase, I've got a melodic pad sound with loads of reverb, which kind of swells, and also has this crushed aliasing sound, which I've varied with the effects lane again. And then in the third phrase, I've got a variety of hi-hat and cymbal one-shots, which are panned in different extreme ways, and also re-triggered for a glitchy kind of ratchety sound. So altogether, and that's it. Some other examples of this I think we can find in chains 30. So and also a wee bit further down in this chain. Here you can see I have gradually moved the pan from left to right, or right to left, I can't remember. So as you can hopefully see, none of this is especially complicated, right? The individual patterns themselves are fairly straightforward, but when you combine all of the elements together, they are more than the sum of their parts and produce something kind of like this. I think one of the most effective things you can do when writing with the M8 is to remember to build in space. it can be really tempting to just throw everything at an arrangement and have all of the 8 tracks doing all sorts of crazy shit all at once. And that is something that you see in a lot of chiptune music historically. It's kind of like a wild assault on your ears and what is more of a technical display than anything else. You know, very demo scene-like. The skill for me anyway is to know when to pull back, when to use the kill command, when to silence certain bits, or have them drop out and then come back in. And that's something that I tried to do in this track as well. With, you know, I guess you can judge the success of that by listening to it. Hopefully this has given a bit of an insight into some of the techniques that I use when writing tracks, and shown that you don't actually have to use tables to get something that can sound fairly complicated or involved or dense or rhythmically interesting and glitchy. If you've got questions or you would like to see more of this type of thing, then you know what to do. This could be totally useless, but it was interesting to walk through, I think. In the meantime, as a reminder, the files for this and all of my other Dirtywave M8 tracks are up on Patreon, so you can go steal my work and pretend to be me for all the good it would do you. Good luck with that.